All right, I hope you guys met somebody that you didn't know. I hope you got a business card or something, and are able to network and get something out of this, guys. I want you to meet each other and learn from each other and grow. So that's why we have great speakers. That's why tonight we have an incredible duo, David and Wendy Bergmanns, which David's from Columbia, so he knows all about everything in Columbia, right? I just dropped that, so you have to say that. But they're here to talk to us about Airbnb, short-term rental, VRBO, whatever it's called now, wherever you can buy these things. And they have an incredible business that they'll show you. They're profiting in multiple different ways using this short-term rental strategy, which I am just blown away by. This did not exist 10 years ago, you guys. This is brand new. Real estate has been bought and sold and rented for centuries, but this is brand new. So if you're just getting started or looking for something to really capitalize on in your business, this is something that is open for everybody. It is prime for the taking, and they're going to show you how to do that and how to work in that. One quick little story. If you guys are following us on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, we've been working on a lake house for a couple months now, and my deal with that was when we found it, and Bishop he did a lot of work on that with those sellers. I was like, man, this is an incredible flip. We got it at like $260. It's worth $524. We just got an appraisal. $524, and it didn't need that much work. We're putting about 80 into it, 80 to 100. Well, we'll get to that, babe. So we budgeted about 80, and so I was like, man, this is an incredible flip. Well, my mistake is I took Michelle out there and was like, we ain't selling this. We're keeping this. Talking about on the lake, it's got a dock, it's got a pool. So then I bought a boat, and it's like, okay, we're keeping it. But the whole point of that, the whole reason, or the way we came about is like, look, we can't keep this in our house, in town. We love where we live. We don't want to move. But we're in the business of real estate. So we're just not going to just be like everyone else and waste money on a second home and just pay taxes and pay for it all the time. So we said, and I told Michelle, I said, look, if we could Airbnb it half the time and pay the mortgage, pay taxes, and insurance, then we can do it. So I called my friend Dave over here, and he sent me a book in an email. It was like this long of how and why we should Airbnb it. So I'm going to let him tell you about where he got all that info, how he said, yes, you should Airbnb it, how the numbers worked out, where he got his data. And guys, I'm telling you, it might just save my marriage from ever going bad. Because now, I can always just say to Michelle, look, you got a lake house. So we can split up if we ever get in a fight. You can lake house. So I want y'all to stand up because it's hard to get speakers to come up here. So y'all stand up and give them a big round of applause. Thank you for coming. David.
Thank you, guys. Well, I will say that my PowerPoint skills are kind of similar to Andrew's. And so this has been a round of edits with Wendy to make this nice and much more beautiful and not just math like yours, Andrew. So hopefully this is pleasing to the eyes now.
We try. So obviously I'm Wendy. I'm originally from the Chicago area, and I went to Clemson for grad school, got my master's in architecture there. I made my way to Columbia, took a job here in 2012. I've been here, going on 9 years now. Met Dave shortly after. Looks like I'm here for a long haul now, but so I'm a licensed architect in the state of South Carolina, and I recently became a property manager in charge as well, which is required by state law to do what we're doing.
And I'm Dave, and I'm from here, like Andrew said, so I'm pretty familiar with the area. I have a master's degree in economics from the university here, University of South Carolina, and I've been in the corporate world for 10 years until about 2 weeks ago. And it took a long time to get there, but yeah, I built a lot of of skills, and I think for those of you who are still in the corporate world, there's a lot to learn from there. So I was able to grow in that position and ultimately prepare me for what we're doing now. Our short-term rental experience, we started using Airbnb basically 3 years ago in 2017. I don't know if you guys remember the total eclipse that happened here in Colombia. We were right smack dab in the center where everybody wanted to be when that happened. And so there was basically zero vacancy in Colombia. And we saw this on the newspaper and we said, well, we know about short-term rentals, so let's just throw our house up on there. And I think we got like $2,000 for that weekend for 2 nights. Just because it was the only option left in Colombia. So it paid our mortgage plus some vacation for us. So we took that and kind of said, wow, there's something here. And since then, we've basically been building our portfolio around short-term rentals, and we really loved it. It's a great business model, and I think it's opened up a lot of opportunities for us. We have grown to 15 listings while working full time. We were both in the corporate world. She was in a small business architecture firm, and we were doing nights, weekends, lunch breaks during work. But we were really able to grow that to 15 listings while we were working. So for those of you who are interested in growing your business, that's a great way to do that. Build up cash flow over time, and then now that we're both doing this full time, we have 20 properties, and we've grown a lot in our experience with short-term rentals, which we're going to share a lot about in this presentation.
Yes. So outside of the 2 of us, we've got now a team of 5 planners or so. We're always looking to add more, so we're never stopping that stage. But one of which is, well, 2 of which have been with us almost from the start. We started off kind of cleaning the houses ourselves, or the 2 apartments that we had first ourselves. Realized really quickly how critical it is to find good quality cleaners that don't just come in and do a general house clean. This is more of a hospitality clean. And it's very difficult to train somebody to what we, not only us expect, but Airbnb guests as well. The standard is really high. And we're also starting a search for an assistant property manager. So we're just gonna keep growing our team, and eventually it'll be less of a burden on us, even though we're, have one less job. I don't know how we were doing it before. I feel like things have just gotten more and more hectic and crazy. And you'll see in the presentation, we've had a lot of things coming up just in the past 2 to 3 months. Big changes.
So just really quickly, I think everybody at this point knows what short-term rentals are, but if there just happens to be one unicorn in the group, I figured I would just mention that these are furnished properties that are rented on shorter time frames than your average long-term rental. Our average, I think, booking is around 4 to 5 nights, but we get a lot of 2 and 3 nights, and we get a lot of weekly kind of bookings. And during COVID, more than that. We also, the biggest thing about short-term rentals is that they're marketed through Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, Booking.com, and a ton of other sites that are just popping up into existence. So there's all of these channels are online, and it's opened up the sharing economy for really anybody to put their listing up there. And you can see the growth here in this market over time in the U.S. From 2014 to 2020, it's 7 times what it was. So it's really grown a ton. And so we got started in 2017. We're kind of trying to build that way, and I encourage a lot of people here to take advantage too. I think that it's a market that has a lot of opportunity.
So obviously there are some good things about short-term rentals versus long-term. One of which is obviously you make higher revenue per month, but there is more control and flexibility over how often you want to lease or place out. If you only want weekend bookings, you can kind of control that. So you're only getting those. If you want weekly or monthly. Maybe you set a larger discount for those longer stays and gain more tenants in that regard. Guests do not have tenant rights going through these outlets, which is different than obviously with a long-term rental. You do reserve the ability to reserve your place for your own use as well with this approach. Especially right now, a lot of families are traveling and trying to quarantine in the location together. So this has become a really powerful thing with the ongoing pandemic. And like Andrew and Michelle are talking about during the lake house, they can enjoy it when they want to and make a little bit of money off of it the other times, or hopefully a lot of money. One of the really nice things about Airbnb is obviously things stay in really pretty condition. Unless you get that one bad guest, but really at any time it's sale ready, it's picture ready, which is something that we really appreciate and enjoy about seeing our places. It's seeing other people appreciate and use them and enjoy them as well. There is less wear and tear usually with short-term rental. A lot of folks are coming for specific reasons, so they're not spending as much time inside the home. COVID has changed this a little bit, I would say, but at the end of the day, there's definitely a lot less wear and tear. People aren't bringing tons of things in with them when they come. It's usually a suitcase. They're not moving their furniture. They're not, bringing all their things into the bathroom and the kitchens and all sorts of things.
And they're not cooking a whole lot either.
Right, they're not usually using the kitchen that often. But at the same level, the expectation is that you're pretty close to perfect. So unlike a long-term tenant who might let a leaky faucet ride for months on end or a running toilet, Airbnb guests or short-term rental guests will usually let you know the moment something has gone the leak awry.
So there are not so good things. I don't want you guys to go out of here and say, oh yeah, this is gonna be easy. Or that there's no risk. There are. The number one and number two risk are these top ones. Revenue is not guaranteed. We saw that during the pandemic. We had about $20,000 worth of reservations canceled by Airbnb almost immediately without refund. With a refund to the guest, meaning no money in our pocket and no warning and no revenue to pay our mortgages and our expenses. So that revenue is never guaranteed. And to be honest with you, we look down at each month with only half of our places filled, and we get the rest of those in the month of the that we're going into. And so a lot of times you're looking at seeing, man, are we gonna be able to pay our bills? You always do, but it's a little bit scary. It's different than long-term rentals in that regard because it really isn't guaranteed. Regulatory risk, you hear about this on the news every day. I mean, more and more cities are just saying, and residents in the cities are mainly the ones leading these efforts saying, we don't want short-term rentals in our neighborhood or in our city, and they're kind of banding together and passing legislation in those places to get it removed from, in various ways. They'll say, maybe you can't, you can only do it if it's your primary residence, which is very limiting for folks like us, or maybe they're putting other regulations like you can only have one. And I put up a little picture here. I was following this in Mount Pleasant and Charleston. They've pretty much done away with it for investors looking for more than one property. So there's always the risk that something like that could happen in your city, and that would be a huge blow to your portfolio.
And obviously the hotel industry doesn't like us a whole lot. And I think you've probably noticed there's been a shift in new hotel, models. And I think there's actually a few going on here in Columbia as well, where they're more extended stay, or kind of a little bit more like a boutique setup where you might have a kitchenette or a separate bedroom space, etc. So there are some adjustments coming the hotel industry as well. But I think what we enjoy about doing this, and what I think our guests enjoy too, is that it's really kind of like a curated experience. We enjoy providing that sense of home or escape or whatever it is that you desire to our tenants like this.
So then the other thing, everybody, this kind of goes without saying, but this is a lot of work compared to long-term rentals. I mean, we have on average like 8 to 10, we call them turnovers a month, where we have a guest leaving and another guest coming, maybe a 4-hour window to make that place ready. So that's always a little bit hectic. On top of that, we're coordinating supplies, materials, maintenance requests. Guests are reaching out about their places and booking in the future and negotiating with us on prices. So there's a lot of it's very involved. So when you're looking at this versus long-term rentals, you have to take into account the time that you're going to spend on the property and make sure that you kind of pay yourself for that time in your numbers.
Because you're also kind of a concierge. We have out recommendations for places to go with the kids, restaurants. Somebody's going to ask if we have specific things in the kitchen because they're packing for the trip and they want to know. There's a lot more involved on a day-to-day communication basis, and I mean, we'll get messages at 3 a.m. We get messages at 6 a.m. We get messages at 4 p.m. I mean, we'll get people showing up early or asking for late checkouts. It's a juggle.
Yep.
All those moving parts.
And then I think this kind of goes without saying, but there's a lot more investment involved in short-term rentals. You're fronting a lot more of the cost, cable, internet, utilities, landscaping, things you wouldn't even think about, like, people damage your linens, you gotta replace that, all sorts of stuff. I mean, it ends up being like, on our average place, it's like $500 a month in expenses. It really adds up. And then there's also that huge upfront cost of just getting a place furnished and ready for that first guest stay. And that's a major investment that if you just renovated a property or just bought a property, you just put a lot of money down, and spending that extra $5 to $10 grand that it takes to get a place ready for guests may not be as appetizing at that point.
And you might think, well, let's do the cheapest stuff I can find, but that ultimately ends up reflecting on your guest experience, your reviews, your revenue, etc. It's a domino effect. So, if your auntie has little furniture that the dogs shoot up and she's gonna give you for free, it's really not a good idea to use that, regardless of how good the price is.
And then finally, just something to keep in mind is it's a lot more complex than long-term rentals. We'll go into a slide on all the kind of day-to-day activities that we have to think about. We wear a ton of hats, and a lot of it is like systems, and we use 4 or 5 different systems. I saw Andrew's systems before. It kind of reminded me of what we do, but just we're using different systems to manage short-term rentals. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to make sure all of our calendars are synced, our pricing is set right, and all that stuff is kind of integrated together. It gets kind of complex, but you need that complexity to manage and operate these pretty well. So just really quickly, since we're in Columbia, a lot of you are from Columbia, you may be interested in what some of the market, like what it looks like. This is from Airbnb, which is kind of the leading market data source. We subscribe to it. If you're thinking about investing, it's a really good place. It costs $40 a month, but it's well worth it, and you can just cancel it after the first month if you don't need it after that. But I highly recommend using something like that to get an idea, especially if it's your first property and you don't have any other way to forecast revenue. What you'll see is we actually have a pretty thriving short-term rental market. We have over 500 listings. Some of those are entire homes. About 2/3 are entire homes, and the remainder are people who list their room, just a room in their house. The monthly booking value is it's getting up to $1 million a month, so that would be $10 million to $12 million in a year. So it's a pretty big market. And you only need a little slice of that, right, to make the cash flow that maybe you want to get to. Performance metrics, just to give you an idea of like what kind of nightly rates people are paying for short-term rentals. This is an average of all bedroom sizes, so it's not all that helpful, but we see like 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms going for that $100 to $115 price range, maybe a little lower if it's smaller. And then we see the larger homes, like the 3 bedrooms, going up to like 150 to even 200 a night if they're really, really nice. And then the average occupancy, that's average of everybody. So people who maybe aren't even really optimizing their listing. If the average can be 58, if you're really good and you optimize the way that we do, we're getting like 75+% occupancy. And that just comes with like experience and understanding how to price right and dynamic pricing, which we'll talk about later. But this is actually pretty good for performance. Demand drivers, most people are going to know this, but we have University of South Carolina right here. That drives a ton of traffic. It's been a little bit down lately. We also have Fort Jackson. They have graduations every single week, so we're constantly getting kind of requests for that. And just general family and work stays. This happens everywhere in every market, but those are kind of the bread and butters. Families who want to stay, visit other family members and want to have a kitchen or want to be right there in the same neighborhood as the person they're coming to visit. So,
yeah, and there's some kind of outliers of family travel. I guess I'll call it family travel, but folks that are selling their home, they have a gap, where they need housing, they don't necessarily want to move all their stuff. We've had a lot of those scenarios recently. Folks that have had, a water line break in the house, they need emergency repairs, medical reasons, maybe they're traveling there for surgery or treatment. We've had a lot of inquiries for that recently. Or folks that are just in the process of moving here too, or they're interested in Columbia, they might come and try it out, experience a couple of the different neighborhoods. We've had a couple of people stay with us in multiple places. They're just trying to figure out where they want to live.
So Columbia can be a really good market, and we'll talk in a second about some of the ways we can eventually invest. And there's a couple different strategies that we're going to go over. There's 3 in particular, so we'll kind of take them in order and share each of those.
So this, obviously the first one is buy. Unfortunately, our text isn't supported on your computer, so that's why our pretty slideshow doesn't look as pretty. But so the first one obviously is buy, and that's kind of how we, after we were renting out our personal home, this is what we did next. And we found a property, bought it, renovated it, furnished it. It was a 2-unit, it was a duplex. So we were able to really kind of customize what we thought we wanted to do with it. Obviously, I know I'm an architect, so this is fun for me. So in this scenario, these are a few pictures of the places that we own, renovated, and then listed on Airbnb, VRBO, our direct booking website.
This is like one from each of our places. We only have like 4 or 5 that we own and have done ourselves and kept. And with the buy strategy, just keep in mind that's going to have the highest cash flow to you of all the strategies we're going to look at, because you're really just paying the mortgage and the expenses, and you're keeping the remainder of that cash flow that you're going to make, especially if you self-manage. If you're not self-managing, then you're going to lose a little bit of that cash flow, but if your time's worth it, then maybe that's worth it for you. But there will be a lot of potential there because you're fronting all that capital to get it ready. It's also going to have the highest control and flexibility, because you can, like Andrew, you can use it when you want. We have a place that we just, we put a family up in it. Every time they're there, it's right across the street. So it's pretty convenient. I definitely recommend it for in-laws.
He's talking about my mother.
But it does, again, it has the highest upfront cost. You're putting down you're putting down all the money for the furniture, the house, the renovations. It's a lot. So we'll talk about some other ways that are cheaper to get into it. but this will be the most expensive. And then finally, I do just want to mention, this is a great, short-term rentals can be paired with other real estate strategies like the FIR method, which I think most people are familiar with, and also house hacking. A lot of people house hack, and they can make twice as much as they would, and it's really easy to self-manage if you're just on the other side of the duplex too. Yeah, and house hacking would just be when you have a duplex or quad or something small, multifamily, where you're gonna live in one side and use the other side to either lease long-term or do something like short-term rentals.
So this was that first buy that we did. I had been an admirer of this house for a few years. We actually went back after we ended up purchasing it a few years later and saw that we first kind of started talking about it like a year and a half prior to it even being available for sale. But it was a long-standing rental owned by a family that had built it. It's in the Earlwood neighborhood. We ended up purchasing it for $55,000. We put about $95,000 in. There was a lot of deferred maintenance. There was a lot of sill damage, sill replacement, all new plumbing, electrical.
Like all the sill.
It was a hot mess. And, there was layers and layers of laminate over the original hard pine floors. The date that this was built was roughly around 1919. So there was the ability to go after the Bailey bill and whatnot as well. So then we got it appraised afterwards, appraised for $220, and got our money out using the Berg method and rolled that into the house next door, which the owner had been renting that one out long term as well, and approached us after we had done the renovation on this house. So we got to kind of roll it on down the street.
Yep. And this has been our best property so far, still from the very beginning. Not only did we get all of our money out, but we also are getting $4,000 a month, and then after our expenses, mortgage and everything else, we're netting $1,750 on this place cash flow. So it's been amazing.
That's one of the reasons why we love duplexes.
Is that a duplex?
It's a duplex.
Yes. So originally it had 2 front doors. City made us remove one, and now the entry for the second one is on the back, and that was really for historical reasons. And then now when the zoning changes, I think that we actually have the ability to do more with it if we decide to. There's a very large attic space, but there's other opportunities to kind of make that one even better for us from a numbers standpoint.
And then the other strategy, can't see it up here, is the lease strategy. This is one that we personally have quite a few of. And what this is where you'll approach an owner of a building who's wanting to lease it long term, and you'll ask them to master lease the property, which is essentially just asking them if you can take over that property like a normal lease, and then you're going to turn around and re-rent it as a short-term rental. You typically want to do this in a mutually beneficial way where they're getting a forever tenant, like we're forever tenants. When we decide we want to do a short-term rental, we're investing a lot of money into the furniture and into making the place look nice and getting it listed. So we'll usually sign a 2-3 year lease with an owner, so they get the guarantee that we're going to be there for a really long time and that they're going to have great tenants because we keep our places like this. So it's kind of a win-win. Not quite as much as buying it, because on top of paying the mortgage, you're also paying for their cash flow, and you're also paying for their maintenance and capital expenditures. So it's, if our mortgage was, let's say $1,000 on a property, they're probably charging us like $1,400 for that property, or maybe even higher than that. So there's a little bit less cash flow potential on the lease. And we also have less control and flexibility. This is the owner's property, so we can't, we have to communicate with them on anything that we would want to do. But it is ideal for folks like us who are really good at operating, but maybe don't want to spend $50,000 to $100,000 on each new property just to get in and create a new listing. This provides the opportunity to kind of maximize cash flow if you're really good on the operations side.
And finding a good rental is hard. There's a lot of student rentals out there. And you can't just, take over one of those places and throw furniture in it and expect to get a good outcome. It's really got to be appropriately renovated, well-maintained, no deferred maintenance. And we actually started doing this February of last year, not like the best time, obviously. But we were able to adjust and, we didn't have to break any of the leases. We were able to fill every place during, March when things really we weren't sure what's going to happen. So we worked really hard to maintain all that, maintain all our commitments, and it's worked out. We've taken on a few more since.
But I will say for those owners out there who are thinking about renting to folks like us, there are, in a lot of cities, not Columbia, but in cities where this is very popular, there are operators who have let go of a lot of leases. So that is a risk from an owner perspective if you're thinking about renting to somebody who wants to do this.
Question.
Yeah.
I've seen that method done a few times in other cities. When people like you approach the owner about that, and I've seen some of these properties be renovated. Now, would you as a sub leasing entity, would you pay for the rehab and the refresh? That kind of worked out with the owner. And in the end, let's say when your lease is up, you furnish the place and you change out the fixtures. I'm assuming you would take the furniture, but would you also leave the fixtures and?
So we personally have not renovated any of these ourselves. Either they've already been renovated or they're in good condition already. Or there's been a couple of scenarios where the homeowner is actually willing to do a few things for us. So we've had people switch out some of the light fixtures or plumbing fixtures.
Yeah. And we'll split costs too. Like we'll upgrade the property, but they'll take on some sort of cost share with it because they also want to see their property improve. So that could be something that works out, I think.
That's true. We have helped pay for some of this. But very minor things like one of the houses had all kind of beigey, creamy yellow walls, and we just wanted to get a nice white palette. So we helped pay for that, for example. So not huge investments by any means, but small things that make a big difference to us and what we want to do.
Yep. And so here's a quick case study. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we did. At the end of last year, we leased a duplex in the Cottontown neighborhood. It's really well done. The owner, the investor, had really done a phenomenal job with the fixtures, and he did IKEA, which looks pretty good.
And we had actually used a lot of the same finishes and the same IKEA cabinets in our first one that we did, the duplex that we bought for $55,000. So it was kind of like we see kind of the same thing as them.
So just giving guys an idea of the numbers, like to actually furnish both units, the upstairs and the downstairs, costs about $13,000. That's a pretty big amount. And then you add in deposit and first month's rent and a couple other expenses. You're paying for utilities. And we had a few weeks where we're just getting the properties ready. We'll probably end at like 17, 18 grand before we even get the first booking. So that's where that upfront investment is involved. But you can see like the projected revenue is $4,200. So if I'm paying him $2,000, I'm paying $700 in expenses. I'm making $4,200 a month, and then that means my net income is $1,500, $750 per unit, and then that means nine months before I pay off the furniture. So we're not really in the black until 9 months down the road, and then after that it's cash flow.
And so far, what was it, December 1st, roughly, both of these were made available, and we've had near 100% occupancy with a bunch of people that want to stay monthly. They really like the place, and they like the pictures, and they want to be comfortable while they're here for various reasons. So strategy number 3 is manage, which we are doing more and more of. We ended 2019 with 1 managed property, and now we have, 10 or so. And we're adding more. We literally were at a photo shoot right before this for a new place that we're going to be managing for some investors. And what's kind of the tricky part about this is your styles don't necessarily always mesh, I guess you could say. Some of the homeowners already have their places furnished, or they had some of the furniture that they had inherited from a family member or a friend. But some of them also are open and willing to talk to us about improvements to make. So the one of the dining table on the far right was actually our next door neighbor who wanted to invest. Dave convinced him after a while. He's an accounting professor at USC. So, they kind of bonded over the numbers part, analytics, and so he bought this property and started renovating it, and we were pretty involved in feedback and kind of getting it to a level where, we felt really happy with it and wouldn't have really done anything different ourselves. So there's some unique opportunities going that way as well.
But you will have ultimately the lowest control. It's, for them, this is their property, you're managing it, and you're really helping them to enforce their vision and what they want to do, their pricing strategy. So a lot of it comes down to the manager understanding what the intent of the owner is and trying to execute that to the best of their ability.
Yeah, and you're being held accountable to two different entities this way too. It's not just the guests, but the owners. And some owners are very hands off, and as long as they get the check at the end of the month or their deposit at the end of the month, they're pretty happy. Others, they are very vocal about just about everything that has to do with the property. So there's good and bad with that too, and I think for us, it's also learning who will ultimately be a good partner or not moving forward. And there's definitely opportunities to trip up going this route.
And that's why we said it's really to do this, you want to be a little bit more of an established operator. You want to kind of have maybe done this on your own before, gotten a feel for what's necessary to really do this, and before you go and try and do it for somebody else. And you don't want to learn with somebody else's property, I guess is what I'm saying. But if you do learn, maybe you get the feel for things, and then you're say, well, I don't have a ton of cash to go out and lease or buy a property, then you may want to see if there's other people out there who want to co-host, they call them co-host, or just want management, and maybe they'll, for absolutely no money, they can bring you on board, and you can start helping them to do the day-to-day activities, because not everybody wants to be as involved in the day-to-day.
So this is actually that one I just mentioned that we came from the photo shoot for earlier. It's one of the salt box houses in Olympia. So these owners are purchasing these, renovating them, extensively renovating them. I don't know if you've been in any of these, but they weren't constructed very well. And a lot of them have been student rentals for years, so they're just not in great shape. So this is the left side of one of those salt boxes, and they have turned it into a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. We kind of went with we also were brought on board to plan and furnish this one, which is a new service that we're kind of offering now too. But they're in the process of getting the tenant out on the one next door. We actually went in it for the first time yesterday, and the difference is truly astonishing. That's all I'll say about that. But so this one's coming up live pretty soon. We'll have the photos tomorrow, and hopefully have that up within the end of the week.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting is kind of to the point, the second bullet here is that they were very, very focused on student rentals, but interested in diversifying out of that. With COVID, student rentals haven't been quite as hot as they once were. And on top of that, they're doing so many of these projects that it doesn't always line up with the school year. So there was a little bit of a timing issue with their construction. And so what we offer them is kind of the flexibility to complete that project whenever they want, and immediately getting the revenue instead of having to wait 6 or 8 months until the school year starts back up and then get tenants. So it's really worked well, I think, for them. I'm hoping it'll work well.
It's kind of a test, but this is an interesting way to help fill that gap in their construction schedules.
But so they would rent this one for $2,000 to students is what they told us. We're expecting to bring in $4,000 a month. With our management fee plus all of the operating expenses, it's probably going to be around $1,300 a month. And so they're going to come away with a net of $2,700 versus the $2,000. So they've increased their cash flow, hopefully, by $700.
And then times 2, because there's a unit next door that they're gonna start renovating.
And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I do want to mention that short-term rentals and operating short-term rentals, especially after you get past 1 or 2, like it is really a whole business. And there's a lot involved on the kind of the more left brain side, which is me. And there's also a lot involved on the right brain side. And you can't just be, I don't think you can just be good at one or the other. And I just would, I think it's important to have a partner or be really capable of wearing all these hats because it's really important. And this business, I think, especially with the competition out there right now, you need to have both the right brain, like have that great theme, have that great design, and do really good marketing, but you also have to know your numbers. So.
But obviously guest experience and design is very important. Not just because I'm biased, but because that's what gets you nice pictures, that's what gets you good reviews. That's
But
what makes me
ultimately,
happy.
it's about the numbers, am I right, guys?
But, you know, if you're gonna make a business out of it, you also need to be present and relatable and very punctual with your messaging. You need to, you know, dedicate a good amount of your time and be able to pick up the phone at a moment's notice and make a call if you need to. And sometimes it's hard to, you can lose things in a text or in an email, but if you just pick up the phone and call this person, you can really smooth things over a lot easier that way if something is just not quite what the guest expects. And then obviously social media, branding, all that stuff, you guys know it's important. It's hard when you get involved in the day-to-day to remember to do those things, but we're trying, or I'm trying. And then the marketing part too, just making sure you got good visuals, good graphics, whatnot.
So we're gonna go into.
Yeah, I'll fly through this because I feel
Yeah,
like taking a while and I want to make sure we have questions. But you know, obviously you need a quality listing, like I said, good design, good furnishings, things that people really feel comfortable and homey with when they come to your space. And a good location too. You can't just buy a property in any neighborhood and expect folks to enjoy it when they pull up. You don't want somebody to pull up and not be familiar with Columbia and think, oh, this is not where I thought I was going to be or where I want to be. Like I said, I'm from Chicago area originally, so my tolerance is much different than somebody who's coming from, I don't know, the suburbs.
Maryland.
Okay, yeah, that was a good one. But just keeping those things in mind and being forefront in your listing, if there's a negative about your property or the location, make sure you mention that. Because if they do complain to Airbnb, then you have that to fall back upon. And, you know, just be honest and open about it. And obviously we're gonna talk about that too, but a great cleaning team, it's really hard, really hard to find good cleaners and folks that really are invested in doing this kind of work. We have a few cleaners that we've mentioned we've been with for a while, and we want them to feel pride in what they do too. It's really the key thing. And then just be careful with bad guests, because I'm sure you've heard about these massive parties and, you know, people trashing houses and whatnot. Luckily, we've been very fortunate and haven't had many bad experiences, but you know, things go bad, just call the cops. If you can't resolve it outside of that.
And there are a lot of tools that are out there, and I'm happy if anybody wants to reach out, I can share some of the ones that we use to help stop parties. Well, yeah, maybe not stop, identify them. Yeah. So some other things to think about that are going to be really important to the success of a short-term rental business is going to be effective use of systems. I mean, you're usually going to be listed on 2, 3, maybe more platforms, and bringing those all together into one place where you can manage your messaging, usually automated in some way, handle your door locks, your calendars, make sure you're not getting double bookings. There are a lot of systems out there that kind of bring that all together in one place, and it's basically essential if you're going to have more than one listing. There are other tools out there, systems that kind of integrate as well, like pricing. So you're gonna want to have these systems because everybody else will, and if you're not pricing the right way, then you're probably losing bookings or leaving money on the table. And to that point, you got to be priced right. Like I see so many listings where they either under budget their price and they're leaving money on the table, or they've overpriced their listing and their occupancy is probably like 30%, and if they're losing money, they're losing bookings. So you gotta be really honest about it. Like you're gonna finish a property, finish furnishing it, and say, I think it should be 150 a night. But when you go out there and look, you really gotta be honest and say, how does this compete with others? It's kind of like listing your real estate. You're gonna want to go high, but you can't. You gotta resist it. And you gotta do, like I said, the dynamic pricing so that you're having higher prices for football games, graduation, the Masters, all those sorts of things. You're also gonna want discounts for longer stays because there's a lot of people out there staying for longer periods of time with COVID. You're gonna want to give 15, 20 plus discount. And then finally, you want to be cross-listed. You want as many eyeballs as possible. There's a lot of platforms out there. Airbnb and VRBO are where you're going to get the majority of your business. But there's also some other, Booking.com is actually starting to become a player. And then there's also Furnish Finder, which is a good place for travel nurses who are looking for short-term rentals. And then you're going to want your own website at some point where somebody can book direct. Cut out Airbnb and VRBO. It's good for the guests because they get a discount, and it's good for us because we can usually make a little more. So it's kind of a win-win if they're able to locate you directly.
So, quick final thoughts. That's what the white box says in white. So one of the things that we really love about this is seeing how people use the homes, and especially during COVID, there's been some interesting scenarios. There was a guy who rented one of our houses. Him and his wife were conducting Zoom classes. Didn't know this till after he had booked, but he was a chef. And I mean, I don't know, I had a little bit of anxiety about a professional chef doing a Zoom cooking class from our kitchen. What if it just absolutely sucks? But so there's been some interesting things that happened, including photo shoots, people wanting to film, bridal parties. Obviously there's been a lot of changes this year, but sometimes I just want a really pretty place to go and take photos before the wedding, and it's a good opportunity to provide people with something that they wouldn't necessarily have access to, something outside of what their normal is.
Yeah, and this isn't something that people can get from hotels. I think that's what I want to get across is this is a different product. It's still in the same category, but we're providing something that's a different experience. It's kind of a boutique experience. They get a kitchen, they get privacy, self-check-in. They're not around other people, which is so important right now. They can be there with their entire family. It's different, and I think this is what people want, and I think it's here to stay. And so that's where the opportunity is to kind of fill that market.
Questions?
There's a bunch of questions.
Okay.
Hey, thank you very much for that. And guys, we got time for questions, so let's ask them. I know there's a ton out there, and I just want to say that was a lot of great stuff. There's a lot of detail in there. So who in here had going over your head a bunch? There was so much there. I was like, if I wasn't in hotels, I'd be like, what? But I'm from here, so I get all that. So I'll let you guys just grab questions. Y'all raise your hands, and I'm interested to hear.
I'm gonna call on Russ because he's tried to raise his hand a few times.
What? I haven't heard a word you said, even with hearing aid.
Oh.
I probably stuck my foot in already, but I got with a partner. We bought a place down in Galveston. too good of a deal turned out. We got contractors in there and stuff like that, they want to Airbnb it. All right, well, everything that I'm hearing you say here, you saying that you should be on top of your property. Pretty much, right?
When you say on top, do you mean?
Same town.
Oh, I mean, you don't have to. You can manage from afar, and people talk about this all the time. I mean, you can self-manage from afar. It's a lot more difficult. Just like investing in real estate, I think is more difficult if you're not in the same area. But if you have good, I would just say you gotta have boots on the ground in some way, because I mean we're running stuff around the units all the time, fixing issues. So I don't know. You gotta have somebody like that.
Probably need
I
information.
we've been talking to Dave lately. So we run Airbnb, we run them in Las Vegas and we run them in Pennsylvania. And the only thing I'll say is, if you're gonna do it, don't throw parties, be a good host, because if you don't, you're gonna ruin it for everybody. Because you want community backlash, you want strong laws, you want the city coming down on you, start having parties. We went through that in Vegas, and you do not want to have to deal with that. It is excuse me for it, it's a shit show. You're gonna pay a ton more, and it all, so be a good host and don't ruin the party for everybody.
That's such a good point. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. What areas in Columbia are, Columbia, Lexington, Midlands, are good rental areas, a good place to buy for an Airbnb?
Just think about where people want to be.
Downtown?
Yeah, they're coming. They're usually traveling to be close to the university, maybe close to Fort Jackson. But really, they're just coming a lot of times to see family who live in like a lot of times the downtown area. What would you say, Wendy?
I mean, the majority of ours are in a few different neighborhoods: Earlwood, Elmwood Park, Cottontown. We have a couple in Shandon. We have one in West Columbia. We have one in Olympia now. And we're actually rolling out 2 that are in Lake Carolina, which is kind of a new territory, obviously, for us. But we've seen that there's some demand there as well. So it's hard to say. I feel like for us, we always want to have a good exit strategy when we go into something. For example, we bought a duplex in Shandon, May 2019. I was 7 months pregnant. I don't know what we were thinking. It was crazy. But we finished that one, rented it out, travel nurses, Airbnb for about a year. We recently sold it to a gentleman that he's a state representative, and he's coming up weekly for session from Mount Pleasant area. And the other unit is Airbnb or short-term rental 24/7. And we've actually had a lot of interest in Shandon lately. People that want to be close to a family when they're visiting. I mean, obviously it's a great neighborhood, but
Just expensive.
there's a barrier to entry there. It's expensive.
What type of homes, or is it homes, condos, duplexes, or in higher demand? Is there any?
Yeah, all
I mean,
Yeah.
people love privacy, so you know, there is sometimes a preference for a single family home. There's a lot of people traveling with pets right now, so if you're pet friendly, that's a huge plus.
handicap accessible as well.
Yep, handicap accessibility. But also I personally like the duplexes because, like with that first example, the $55,000 house we bought, we can fill one of those with a monthly person. Everything on the other side is, just bonus for us. So there's a lot of,
You can share a lot of costs too.
Yeah.
Like your internet, you get a wireless internet router, you can use it on both sides, small stuff like that. I mean, it adds up in the numbers.
yeah. I mean, and there's also the ability with those is we do each side rent out, but we also have like a joint listing where you can rent the whole house. So if there's somebody that's coming for a wedding or a family visit, like Thanksgiving or Christmas this year, a lot of our larger homes, we're really booked very well, by the way.
The last one is lenders. Are there lenders that lend for Airbnbs? Is it
I've heard that they exist, but I've never.
Okay.
It's tough. It's tough, I'll just say that.
Thank you.
So,
Hold on one second. One question for the lenders. If you were to do a master lease, if I was a landlord, I owned a house, you master leased it, has that happened where then your owner's gone to a bank? Because now you have a long-term lease.
Gone to refi.
To refi, yeah.
I've done that with our properties. Like I'll have our business lease from us,
And you've been able to
we
refi. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so that kind of, you're not a Airbnb nightly rental because you have a master lease
Yeah.
with them.
So we buy it ourselves and then.
You buy
lease
it,
to a company.
you lease it to a management company, yeah. Nigel, go ahead, sorry for stealing.
You're fine. So do you have to be a licensed property manager to co-host with the regular hosts if you're charging them a monthly rate of like say 10, 15, 20%?
Technically, yes.
Why technically?
But I would say if you're gonna go the co-host route, if you're not performing some of those full property management services, if you're just doing the like coordination with the guests and the cleaners, maybe that's like kind of on the line. But
Okay.
it's up to maybe everybody's interpretation to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, you risk, being audited or whatnot by, the real estate commission regardless. So we, since we're doing a business per se, partly furnished homes, it was really in our best interest to go and get that license.
Okay.
It took us a little while to figure out that that's what we needed to do. But now we have all those things in place to function in the law in South Carolina.
Okay.
Question, do y'all own the majority of the properties that you have, or the majority of them you have master lease?
I'm gonna go back to the 4, 6, 10. Exactly. 4 owned, 6 leased, 10 managed.
And I think all except one of the owned ones are 2 units. So, it might be one piece of property, but, our listing count doubles up to 8 at least with those.
Did you find that you got more higher occupancy rate listing on both Airbnb and VRBO, and are those guests kind of really lean to more to one site than the other?
Airbnb is more popular in Columbia. Every market's different. Your vacation rental markets tend to lean VRBO, and actually just at Lake Murray, it's majority VRBO. But then you come to Columbia and it's Airbnb. It kind of flip flops. But yeah, that's a good question. And AirDNA will actually provide this data and tell you how many are listed.
Kind of aggregate the booking information from Airbnb, VRBO, and whatever other site you want.
That's called a channel manager, and we use one called HostAway, but there are a ton out there. And we started with one. We went through probably 2, 3 before we got to this one. And there's ours is a little bit more of an expensive one, but if I were gonna get started, I would use IGMS, it's just the one that is free up to 4 properties.
Yeah, so going back, you guys were talking about cost earlier. What capacity do you guys really look for? Because obviously if you're at 100% all the time, you're probably a little too low. If you're under that, you might be too high. So what do you guys try to get at?
Yeah, it depends. I like in the 70s. That's where I like it. If you're kind of getting, but at the same time, in certain times you can get up to 100% occupancy if you're priced the right way and you get last minute, even single night bookings to like fill it. Because at the end of the day, you just want somebody sleeping there. Even if you have to drop your rates a ton, there's just a little bit of a trade-off, and that trade-off tends to be you're going to get bad guests or have a lot more work because you're turning over properties all the time. But I like the balance, and what we've seen for our properties is in the 70s, like 75 around there. For our single-family homes, absolutely, yeah. On the exterior, of course. Yeah. be said, but you know.
Yeah, do you guys consult?
Yes. Well, on what part?
Oh, ain't got an artistic bone in my body.
I would say, so I left my full-time job back in June, and since then it's definitely scaled up. We're providing more consulting based on, furnishing, sometimes with renovations as well. I usually always end up drawing up a floor plan, even if it's like a lease property or something, because I like to really maximize and plan out what we're getting. Will it fit? Is it going to be too tight? And I'm a visual person. I gotta have that. I gotta have my roadmap. So.
What kind of way do you guys, like if you're looking at property to buy, how do you kind of evaluate, well, this property will probably do, 20,000 a year versus this other property, maybe it'll do 30,000 a year? Like, would a property near a college do better than a property near a hospital? How do you kind of estimate your costs before you start? It's not really like regular real estate.
That's the challenge. I mean, it's uncertain at the end of the day, and you can only do your best at trying to, I try and triangulate it, because no one data point is going to tell you, like, you're going to make this much. You're guessing at the end of the day, kind of like when you're trying to sell real estate in a certain area. But the best way to do that is like Airbnb with the market data. Try and find similar properties, and even has something called a rentalizer. You just plug in the address, and it kind of consumes the real estate data, and then gives you an estimate. But that shouldn't be your only way of trying to estimate the revenue. You also want to go out. I do this all the time. I go out to Airbnb in incognito mode, so it doesn't know that I'm actually a host. And then I just plug in dates out in the future and see what comes up in the little area that I'm looking in, and try and find like 2 or 3 competitors to see what are they charging, and then click into their calendar and see how booked up they are. You'll know they're booked because they'll have blockers on their dates. And so you can kind of look within a month and say, okay, it looks like they have 50% occupancy based on 15 days being booked. So that's a good way to kind of get an idea of what people are asking for their places. And then if you assume, like, I would assume like a conservative occupancy rate, kind of more in line with what we saw with the market, like 55%, somewhere around there. That way you're not getting into a deal that's maybe justified with numbers that may or may not be realized.
What are your management fees?
Our management fees are 20%, but other companies.
Of like the rates, of the income, basically, 20% of the income?
Sorry.
20% of the income from rates?
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I think I heard over here, that's kind of industry standard for short-term rentals. It comes as a shock for people who only know long-term rentals, but it's a very involved, obviously. We're turning over properties 10 times a month, and there's all sorts of other stuff going on. I think there's a couple other like national short-term rental management companies that operate out at the lake, and they charge around 25%, 27%, just depending. And
And there are some that might charge less, but they're not doing as much as like what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Is that like monthly? So you look at total how much has been rented out monthly, or do you do it per stay? So like if they stay in the $100, then y'all get $20 off each stay.
Monthly.
Okay.
Yeah. Just keep it simple.
What services do you provide as a manager?
We could talk. We can maybe talk about that after, but yeah. Management just includes like day-to-day operations, but full service includes everything long-term rentals would provide, but then all the day-to-day of just making sure the property is stocked and ready to go for each guest.
And communicating with all the guests. I think we said earlier, we have some owners that they just want their deposit at the end of the month, and that's as involved as they are. So really, I'm acting as you entirely, 100% in that regard. There's other folks that want to be more involved and have more of an opinion on should we accept this inquiry or not. So it's how much do you want to be involved at the end of the day, and how valuable is your time, and how busy are you outside with family life or other investment projects that you have going on too.
Okay.
How often do you guys have to update the pictures for your listings?
That's a
Hopefully
good
not
question.
very often.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
you gotta do it really right the first time. That's something we've learned along the way. You gotta have professional photos, and you gotta stage it well and be ready for that day. I mean, you can get professional photos, but you gotta set that place up so it looks perfect.
I mean, I'm a shifter. I like to shift things around every once in a while, and that doesn't mean within the house. That means like I might take a table or two from this one and put it over here because it's just going to fit better. And I found something better for that. We haven't had to change a whole lot that I think has warranted new photos because it's still there's still a table there, etc. So like our photos for the $55,000 duplex that we bought, we have never changed those photos, and we post. God, was that 2017 or early 2018 when that went live? Is there another question?
Okay, maybe the last one.
Do you recommend changing out the furniture every couple years, or what, like wear and tear on like the furniture and stuff like that? How do you deal with that like over time?
Gotta inspect it. And if you're communicating with your cleaners well, they're your boots on the ground, they're gonna tell you. They go in and do an inspection before they even start cleaning, and take a picture of any damages that they're finding, and they're gonna alert you or the manager to anything that needs to be replaced.
I mean, anything beyond normal wear and tear, you can usually get those costs back from the guests, especially if it's through Airbnb. But there have been a few instances where something just hasn't fared well. We have had to replace things. I mean, there's normal wear and tear on most everything. But we do regular inspections too. That's really me. I'm like going in like, oh, that's fraying or that, So it's important to also, not just rely on your health, but you want your eye, because nobody is going to care as much about your personal property than yourself.
Big round of applause. Thank y'all so much, guys. Who learned something today? I think everybody's hands going up. That was incredible. Dave and I have been talking about this for a couple of weeks. I mean, since the lake house kind of came upon us, and so I'm learning a lot. I'm from the hotel industry. Many of you know that. And if you don't, I used to manage a hotel just a couple blocks away. I did not want to do Airbnb. I said I am not doing Airbnb because I have been a hotel manager for 12 years. And so I kind of just put it behind me. Didn't even think about it. Had we had this meeting like 2 years ago, I'd probably still have 4 or 5 Olympia Mill Village student rentals, and they would all be Airbnb because that looked beautiful. I don't know if y'all saw that, but if you've ever been in one of the Olympia houses, they never look that good, ever. And so even when I lived in one, so yeah, I definitely would have kept more of them because I would have done Airbnb and kept it nice. Whole problem with student rentals, and if you guys have them, we do, is they look nice day 1 because I went and fixed it, and then day 30, the football season is full going, and the house is destroyed. So a fun story of a Texas Street house. You knew I was going to say it. These guys went to 2016 maybe. Connor Shaw and the Gamecocks were down in Missouri, down 4 touchdowns in the 4th quarter. We came back in overtime victory. The next day, Sunday, the tenant texts me and says, the floor's got a little bit of a dip in it. I was like, a little bit of a dip? Okay, weird. I was like, I'll send somebody to look at it. He's like, don't worry about it, we're leaving for Thanksgiving, check it out later. He texts me the next day, he's like, you might want to come look at this. I said, okay. It was the day before Thanksgiving, I think, about Tuesday or Wednesday. So I go over there, and this little dip he's talking about was an entire bowl in the living room of this house where they had clearly had a party and everyone jumped up at the same time and broke and destroyed 4, 5, or 6 joists holding the floor.
It was a trampoline.
It was a
The floor was a
trampoline in the living room of our newly renovated student rental. He literally, the only reason the floor didn't go through is because the ground was there. The same. So that is why I don't have as many, and now I'm going to hire somebody to manage my Airbnb. So guys, it is time for us to break out here. You are welcome to hang out. REI Live will be back on the 17th, and we will be at King Charles, 37 King